Getting your personal brand really dialed in helps you have that moment of self-reflection is to find an area of passion, get into that community, find the most simple problem they're struggling with, and offer a simple solution to that problem.
Welcome to Be Bold Branding, where we discuss the power of differentiating yourself through your own unique story and standout personal brand.
If you are a podcast host or a frequent guest on a podcast, well, you've no doubt heard of PodMatch, a website that automatically matches ideal podcast hosts and guests for interviews. Well, we jumped on board as soon as we learned about it, and since August of 2021, we've done over 120 podcasts with other PodMatch members. Woohoo! Mm-hmm. So we've also become great friends with our guest today, the founder of PodPros, Alex Sanfilippo. Today, we're going to take a look behind the scenes to learn how he got here and what's next when it comes to creating solutions that serve independent podcast hosts and guests.
Alex, welcome back to Be Bold Branding.
Tonya, Michael, I appreciate you both. Thanks so much for having me. And by the way, those are not typical results. You all have clearly done something right and crushed it. I mean, you all are in the branding space, so I'd hope that you get it right. And it seems that that has happened for you both. But honored to be back with you all and really excited to have this time together.
Us too, for sure. And all the listeners that wouldn't know this, Alex and I share a birthday.
Just last
Probably
week.
2 decades between our ages, but that's okay. And it's still the same great day. So
yeah, Alex is much older.
Anyone watching can tell, obviously.
I know. Like, very well preserved, sir. I don't know what you're doing down there in Jacksonville, but tell the rest of us. No, all seriously, tell us, you've been on the show before, right? But for those who might not know your story, can you give us a little brief? How'd you get started and how'd you end up in the podcast world?
Yeah, sure thing. And I'll keep it fairly brief. And I appreciate the warm introduction you both already gave. So I was a corporate guy for 15 years. And so I was building another company and was in the aerospace industry. And before anyone listening gets all excited, I wasn't an astronaut, I wasn't a skydiver, and I wasn't a fighter pilot. All right. I worked behind a computer, and it was a parts manufacturing company that focused below the atmosphere. We worked with militaries and stuff. Sounds fancy. It was a fun job for me, but most people will be like, this is super boring. You would not make a movie about my life. Let's put it that way. But I loved it. I really enjoyed it. But that company went public. And when it went public, I felt, and I mean, this is like kindly as I can say, but I felt more like a cog in the system than an executive of that company because I had to keep shareholders and board members happy instead of just having good ideas and implementing them. That's how we grew the company to be a multi-billion-dollar company. And I just felt like I lost that creative element. So I got into podcasting because I wanted some creativity in my life and I wanted to learn how to be an entrepreneur. And 2 things quickly happened. I learned how to become an entrepreneur and I learned I wanted to be in podcasting. So I actually was able to step into it with PodMatch being the first product/service that me and my co-founder decided to offer. Again, the one that connects guests and hosts for interviews. And since then, I've gone on to launch other podcast-related products as well. And that's why we made the umbrella company called PodPros. And so everything we do is podcasting. I always tell people, like, so what else do you do? I'm like, nothing. I'm 100% podcasting. I'm a host, educator, software founder, and many other things, but it's all in direct relation to the podcasting industry. So that's kind of my backstory and how I got where I am today. And real quick, kudos to both Tonya and Michael. You all helped me understand how to streamline that because I had all the aerospace stuff. I don't talk about it anymore, not because I don't love it and didn't appreciate it in my life, but it doesn't make sense for the brand, especially the personal brand that I'm attempting to build. So helping me get really narrow focused. That was a kudos to you both. You all really helped me with that a lot.
Thank you, sir.
We appreciate that. So just for those of you who may not be part of PodMatch yet, it helped us so much because before that, Michael saw the vision of podcasting, several years back, and he said, okay, we need to get somebody in here. So we actually hired an intern and we brought them in, and their entire job for one entire day every week was to go through all of the different, to go wherever they could to find all the different podcasts that they could find that we would be a fit for and make this big, long spreadsheet. And then we had somebody else reaching out, calling on everybody. And then it's like the angels intervened and here comes PodMatch, right? And it's like, oh my gosh, this is so much easier. So it made things so much easier. But you've also introduced other software solutions for podcasters like Pod Lottery, Podcast SOP. Tell us a little bit about those.
Sure. So both of those and PodMatch, I should say, all came out of a direct response to a problem that the community I care about was facing. So like I said, when I launched my podcast, I learned how to become an entrepreneur. What I learned, very simplified from interviewing 100 and some odd people, was find an area of passion, get into that community, find the most simple problem they're struggling with, and offer a simple solution to that problem. And so first, it was podcast hosts having trouble finding guests. So that's why we built PodMatch, and vice versa, right? We had guests that were like, I don't know where to go. And then the next thing that we realized was a problem is that we built Podcast SOP because so many people that were getting into podcasting didn't have corporate backgrounds like I did, where I really understood project management software really well, but many of them didn't. So what we decided to build was a very simple project management tool that just helps podcast hosts release episodes on time. So it's literally like your production process that you build yourself. It's a glorified checklist plus some more. My co-founder hates it when I just simplify it to that. But it's been very helpful because the problem was I was telling hosts, they're like, I'm so stressed out, I'm disorganized. I'm like, oh, use Asana, use Trello, try Monday.com, right? Like use all these tools. And then they were like, Alex, you just gave me another tool that does 20,000 things I don't know how to use. Like, you think I was already stressed? What about now? I was like, good point. So we built it as a direct response to what the problem was that was being needed by hosts. And the last thing was Pod Lottery, which is a fun, gamified way for podcast hosts to do review swaps with each other. And we just do it in a lottery system. Basically, everyone picks numbers, and every night numbers are drawn. And if your number's drawn, you win one or up to a whole bunch of reviews for your podcast. And that's been really fun. That's not like that was like a passion project. Like, we just saw hosts having a really hard time getting reviews, but it's like not monetized, never will be. There's no pay gateway. It's like all free, just fun. It's a community builder among podcast hosts. And again, at the end of the day, if I could share my passion in podcasting, it is to help and serve independent podcasters and their guests. And that's what I love. And sometimes that means building something that's completely free and fun for all of us so we can build a tighter community. And again, those are my services that I offer.
Love it. Love it.
Yeah.
Good and concise too.
That's
One
right.
brand.
Yeah. See, all we do is personal branding. All he does is podcasts.
That's it.
Podcasting. Everything he does is for the podcasting world. I love it.
Yeah. So what are some tips for pitching a good podcast that you want to be a guest on? Is there anything that you can lead the listeners on with that? In other words, what's the best way to get a yes?
Yeah. First off, Michael, I love the question. And it's one of those things that's actually getting more difficult as time goes on. There's been actually a handful of companies, so I'm not even going to quote it because the data in podcasting is moving so fast, but do your own research if you're listening to this. Podcast guesting is really becoming increasingly popular at a more rapid rate than we've ever seen before. So people are realizing, oh, wow, like if I'm a guest on a podcast, I get a podcast interview, I get backlinks from all these top 100 websites in the world, and all these social assets and all these other things that the host provides to me. I get to develop know, like, and trust my audience, right? Like, oh, and it doesn't cost me anything. Like, unbeatable, right? Like, it adds so much value. But because guests are now seeing this, and people that are in business or whatever it is, like activists, anybody is seeing the power of it, they're jumping on board. And at time of recording, again, I don't want to like throw numbers out there because it's going to be tripled in just a few months. Let's put it that way, right? But we're seeing at least 20x increase on the number of actively people looking to actively be guests on podcasts and hosts. So there's really never more than about 200,000 shows looking for guests, but there are millions, tens of millions now of people actively looking to be on podcasts. And because of that, it's getting more competitive. And Michael and Tonya, you've all been in podcasting long enough now to remember the day you can just say, hey, can I be on your podcast? And hosts are like, thank God, somebody. Yes, of course, right? And now when you do that and you're like, here's my expertise, they've got 10 other options and 5 of them are probably better than each of us, right? Like, it's like, oh, wow, okay. Hey, I'm really good at making $1 billion. It's like, oh, Elon Musk wants to be on your podcast too. It's like, oh, goodness, like, what do I do now, right? So it's becoming more and more important for podcast guests to separate themselves in the mind of a host in order to get booked. And so I've actually built out a framework that's worked really well for me when I go to be a big guest on podcast. If I could share those 5 steps, I think that'd be really helpful. You all open to that?
Absolutely.
Sure. Absolutely.
Cool. So I'll go through these and feel free to interrupt me, or just we can get to the end and you all can ask some questions on it, but I'll kind of keep it pretty brief. And this is exactly how I reach out. The secret sauce of this is to keep it short. And as a podcast host myself, let me tell you why I say that. We got into podcasting because we don't want to read. So don't make us read, right? And some pitches I get, it is just paragraph after paragraph after paragraph. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I like to listen to stuff. What is this, right? So the secret is to keep what I'm about to say as short as you possibly can. You don't even have to write full sentences. It's better that you just get the information out as quickly as you can. So step 1, the first thing you want to do is lead with value. Lead with value. What that means for me is I'm actually going to listen to the podcast and I'm going to know something about it. And that is so important to a host, to know that you actually did. And that doesn't mean, hello, Tonya and Mike, right? Yeah, because everyone who listens knows we don't call you Mike. I listen to Be Bold Branding Podcast and wow, I love the latest episode. right? That does not tell me that you actually listened to it. But if you say, hey, you know what? I listened to an episode you did with someone named Amanda about sell more easily by moving from fear to flow. And she talked about how you have to walk in with the right mindset, because whatever you walk in with is what you're going to walk out of that with as well. Which what I just told you is a real story. And by the way, great episode. I encourage listeners to go back to February 8th, if I'm remembering correctly, the episode with Amanda. I don't remember her last name, but she actually talked about selling without fear being involved. Go back. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yep. Sorry, that's a terrible side note there. I should be staying on track. But the point is, you got to lead with that value, right? And to take that a step further, like after you mention specifics, I also like to leave a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts and attach that. So when I say, hey, love this episode of your show, I listened to it, here was like my key takeaway. Also, I like this show so much, I left a 5-star rating and review. I just attached that for you to take a look at. Here's what you just did as a potential podcast guest. You got the attention of the host. I have had hundreds of people ask, I shouldn't even say, I've had thousands of people ask to be on my podcast. One of them has done that, and they weren't really a great fit, but guess what? I let them on the show anyway, because I'm like, no one's ever done that. They're like, yes, you're definitely getting on there. And I'm not saying it's always going to be, like, it's not a silver bullet, it's not always going to work, but at the very least, I promise you have the host's attention at that point. So step 1, lead with value. Step 2 is to make a meaningful request. Going back to those real long emails I get from people, a lot of them don't include an ask. So I'm like reading it and skimming it. I'm like, I don't know what this person wants from me. Are they just telling me what they've done? Like, do I say, wow? Like, how do I respond, right? A meaningful request means having one with intention and it being very clear. So with intention means, hey, by the way, Be Bold Branding, I realized that you haven't had anyone talk about pitching to be a guest on podcasts in the last 4 years or longer. That's as far back as I scrolled. I would love to be the guest to come on and talk about that. It's something that I like to discuss regularly. I made a very clear, precise reason for me being on the podcast and what I want to cover, because they haven't just covered it. That right there, once again, might make the host go, oh, wow, he or she's right. Like, we haven't actually had this on. That's very interesting thought, right?
Mm-hmm.
And doing that, I find to be extremely helpful. And Tonya, Michael, I want to give you a second to interject if you want to, because I don't want to be overwhelming. If you all want, I'll just keep on going, but I want to give you
Go for it.
Okay.
Yep.
Going to keep on running through it. So I hope you're all still listening, and I appreciate everyone being here. The next step, so you lead with value, you make a meaningful request. The next thing that you're going to do is to actually offer some credibility. And this is where a lot of people get it wrong, I find. Credibility to me in this moment isn't the, I've been in business for 20 years, I've done this, I've done that. And a lot of people first off start with that. But like, now we're to that point. I still don't think you should do that. I do think you should link to those things. So for me, I have a PodMatch profile and it has a public facing version of it. So every time I do a pitch, I lead people to that public facing version of it, where if they want to learn those little details, they can see all of those. But when I say make a meaningful request, I simply mean mention who we both know. So the first thing I do, if I want to be on a podcast, I go look to see, okay, who do we have friends in common with on social media? Okay, they were on that person's podcast. I was on that person's podcast too. That's credibility. And at the end of the day, like, you can have all these accolades and things like that, but what matters most is, who do you know that I trust, so I can also trust you, is what it comes down to. And I'll give you an example. Someone recently asked me to be on a podcast, which I know is kind of like the flip side of what we're talking about, but her show hadn't launched. And typically I say no to people whose shows haven't launched. I'm not trying to be mean, but they don't usually launch. So it's kind of like a little bit of wasted time sometimes. However, right when she sent the email, she opened up with, hey, Alex, I'd love to have you as a guest on the show. I had this person, this person, this person, this person that you know on the podcast. I didn't even finish reading it. I saw those names and know how associated I am with them. Literally said, hey, I didn't have time to read this, but just tell me when and where to show up and I'll be there. That's it. And it's because they offer the credibility of, oh, these 4 people? Yeah, I'm in. So again, if you can offer a little something that tells people, hey, this is who we know in common, you can ask them about me. And I typically do this like in a funny way, because I have like a weird sense of humor. But I say, hey, I know Tonya and Michael. Reach out to them and make sure that I'm legit. By the way, I pay them to say nice things about me, so please let me know what they say. Right? Like, I just throw it out there like that because it's my personality, what you're going to get if I'm a guest. So that's important. So again, lead with value, make a meaningful request, offer credibility. And the 4th thing is to mention sharing the episode. One of the biggest problems in podcasting is that guests don't share the episode. They kind of go with this model of, once I'm a guest, check, done. Who's next? Right? And we're finding more and more that, one, guests are starting to realize, oh, there's actually value in this. I should really be sharing this because my audience loves the longer form content that I'm part of. So we're starting to see a shift there. But in general, hosts are still like, I wonder if this guest is going to be willing to help me out at all, right? But if you say in there, hey, I'd love, and this is what I say, I'd love to link to your episode from my website, and we're going to share it on social media, and I'll share it in my community as well. And please don't lie, like, have integrity in what you do. But if you really are willing to share, then mention it, because that goes a long way. Now the host is like, wow, this person's going to actually help me. How nice is that? And the final thing, the 5th step, is to make it easy to say no. And this sounds weird. I mentioned Loving a Sales podcast episode that you all did just a minute ago, but making it easy to say no gives you the opportunity to build a relationship without having your heart broken. And here's why I say that. If you've done all this work, now if a host is like, you know what, I just had somebody on about the same topic, but the episode hasn't aired, sometimes you're just like, I'll just ignore it because I don't want to break their heart. They put so much into this, right? But if you just say, hey, no worries either way. I only want to be a guest if I can truly add value to your audience. I'd love to hear from you either way. If you just say something like that at the end, you now are opening a dialogue. And what I usually find to be true is that no doesn't mean no. It means not right now. So if you can open that dialogue and build that conversation with them, they might have friends they can refer your way. There might be all kinds of things that can be opened up. So just leave it open-ended. And that 5-step process has worked great for me. I don't always get on the podcast, but I almost always, at the very least, get some sort of relationship out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Those are great tips. And that last one is a nice segue into this next question, which is saying no in a little bit different way. So if people are asking you, hey, we think you'd make a good guest on this particular podcast, because we've been on PodMatch so long and have done so many interviews, we do, as many people do, get invited to be on podcasts. You can't be on them all, and not all of them fit. So what's a gracious way to say no and still leave those lines of communication open when you're asked to be a guest, but it's not really a fit?
Tonya, this is the first time I've ever been asked this question. So thank you. And it's one that I actually struggled with early on. Like by nature, I'm a people pleaser. And saying no to anybody is extremely uncomfortable for me. Like, I'll just be transparent. I've gotten better at it, but it's not something that naturally comes easy for me. And, we all have these friends. You're like, man, you're so good at saying no. Why can't I be like that? They're like, what's the big deal? There's nothing to it, right? And the truth is there isn't, but there's something in our mind, right? So for me, like being the founder of PodMatch, I have a good number of people, probably not as many as you guys, because you all have such an amazing reputation on the platform. You all probably get reached out more than I do. But when I do get reached out to, 20% of the time, it's like a podcast. It's like mindset for coaches. And maybe I could stretch and do something on there. Nothing against those shows. I just, like I said at the beginning, I'm through and through podcasting. Like, that's all I know. That's all I talk about. You all taught me to narrow in my personal brand. And I'm like, this is it. This is what I talk about. And so at first I was like, I don't know what to say. And so I had these long, drawn out excuses, more or less, for why. And what it finally came down to was just being completely honest, which the first thing was me understanding what I actually offer. I had to look internally first. And the way I started responding to people that were inviting me to be a guest or trying to be a guest, I just say, hey, listen, I would love to. I wish I could be on all the shows, but I just can't. And I have to stay focused here. And I know that your audience wouldn't glean a lot from me. And because of that, I want to pass out of respect for you and your audience and saving each other's time. I just keep it really simple like that. And 98% of the time, people are just like, that makes sense. I really appreciate it. Right? Like, people aren't even mean about it. That's been working for me. And again, that's not natural. Even when I hit send on that every single time, I feel like a little tense, like, oh, man, I hate I'm doing that. But
I know
you have to. I'd love to.
I thought I was the only guy that did that.
Right?
I know we're the same way. It just
really, I'd love to put the question, how have you all done this? Just out of curiosity.
About the same way.
Yeah.
We're just honest with them about it and set boundaries that we don't cross over, but we let them know that those are the boundaries, but and just very gracious about it. Because really and truly, like all 5 points that you made, fantastic points. Building a personal brand does so much of that work for you, not just in podcasting, but definitely in your ideal customers, whatever it is you're selling in the world, because you got a clear ask. That does speed up people's processing time. And I find, especially in bigger business, that that's exactly how most people want it done. Quick and to the point. It's okay. It's not personal. It really is business. That's not just a cliche. And podcasts, I think, are getting to that spot where that's going to be more and more and more and more the norm. Definitely.
I believe that too. I really think we're seeing the power of the niche in podcasting really start to take effect. But if I could go back a year and a half ago when you two first met with me, and people would be like, hey, will you be on my podcast about entrepreneurship? I see you just posted something on entrepreneurship. Hey, can you talk about aerospace? Because I saw you just post something about your old job, right? And honestly, like you just said, getting narrowed in on your personal brand helps take care of a lot of this, because now I only talk about podcasting. And yes, I play soccer, and so does my wife. So I talk about soccer a little bit, but we sponsor the teams that we play on. So I twist it back to podcasting, right? Like, it's still connected. No one's trying to have me on a soccer podcast. So no, he's a podcaster that happens to play soccer, not a soccer player who happens to podcast. So it still keeps you in that space. So it makes it so much easier to say no in a respectful way. Because listen, all I do is this. Look at anything I post anywhere, and you'll confirm that. I'm not like, hey, I don't really talk about entrepreneurship. Because people are like, yeah, you do. I was just on your social media. You post that all the time, right? Like, that doesn't exist anymore. So getting your personal brand really dialed in helps you have that moment of self-reflection as to what do I really add? Where should I really be focused? So that, again, I don't mean to just keep on pushing things back to y'all, but it really helped me so much with getting good at saying no to people.
No, and I appreciate you saying that too, because we've been friends a while now, and you discovered something that Tonya and I were battling when we were making our rules, our boundaries, if you will, and defining what podcasts we were valuable to and who we were going to try to match up with on your platform, all of that. And then we were on I think one of your masterminds, and you talking about it, and you were like, hey, I was on this show, and even though it didn't really have anything to do with what I was talking about, which I'm sure was podcast, but it had this huge following, right? I don't even remember the names of these things, but like this was a podcast you said you were on. And then you were on this other one that actually dealt with podcasting, and it had like these tiny download numbers, like 20 a month or something. Like the guy was just getting started. And you said you got more clients off of the small one than you did the huge swath, even though the other one had millions of followers and exposure, because it wasn't the right exposure. And definitely, I think that fits with what we're seeing every major social media platform do nowadays. It's all niche. They're all making it community, making it more local. They're not serving your ads out further than your own community in many, many, many respects, right? And podcasts are going to end up being the same way. And you can get so much more bang for your buck if you use PodMatch correctly, if you put your personal brand out there, if you do the 5 things that you just said, then you're going to find your business grow, because you may only be talking to a 50 download or 100 download podcast this month, but it may bring you 10 times more business than somebody with 1 million if that's not the right clientele. Don't you think?
Wholly, completely. And the reason I like to even reinforce this a little bit more, and I know I agree with everything you just said, so I probably shouldn't even say anything beyond it, but I'm going to real quick here. So a lot of people look at social media and podcasting as apples to apples, right? It's the same thing, basically, compare them the same way. And the truth is you can't. And no disrespect to social media, it has its place for sure. But you can't tell me that a scroll and maybe a double tap on something you do and keep on going is the same as someone sit and listen to you for 45 minutes.
Right.
It's not the same at all. And to me, podcasting, if someone's listening to you on a show, it's the same as people sitting in seats. So if I tell you, hey, there's 50 people listening to my podcast, you're like, oh, that's not a lot, because you're comparing it to social media likes and follows, which again is a half a second engagement or maybe less with somebody, right? But a podcast is the same as people sitting in seats, listening to you, giving you undivided attention. They have confirmed they want to hear what you have to say. That to me is so powerful, because you truly develop a know, like, and trust. And if I could share one quick story on that, it was actually an interview I did with Jasmine Starr. She's done very well in podcasting and on social media and beyond. I mean, she seems to be good at everything. But I asked her, I'm like, where do you get most of your leads from? And she's like, oh, ads and this and all these, like my email list, all this stuff. And then I was like, what about podcasting? She said, oh, I get the least amount of true leads from my podcast. And I was like, okay, so how valuable are those leads in comparison? And she was so excited that I asked that question. She's like, thank you for realizing the power. She said that they have a totally separate category for where leads that come from their podcast go, because it's almost a guarantee that they will do business with them. And she said something like they're going to do 10x more or something, like on average. And it's because, again, that person has listened. They've developed that know, like, and trust up front. They don't have to try to sell anything anymore. That person has pre-told everybody, hey, I'm all in. Tell me what to do next. And so again, that to me is the power of podcasting. And when people are like, I only want to be on the big shows, I'm like, you're missing a huge opportunity. If I had 50 people in a room right now, invited you in to speak to them, and all 50 are ready to work with you, you can't tell me you'd be passing that up. And too many people are like, oh no, I'm thinking social media numbers. It's got to be big or it's not worth my time.
Right. Yeah. That is counterintuitive, but for the listeners, it is really important. That is identifying your ideal customer and then speaking to that ideal customer over and over again. And it's very powerful.
One of our best success stories of a small group presentation. We did a presentation one time. I think there might have been maybe 16 people on it. It was a virtual presentation. It was before COVID, but we, out of those 16 people, got 6 new clients out of those 16. Wow. We hit the nail on the head with who we're supposed to be in front of, right? And we continue to replicate that by going into these small groups and saying, okay, this is exactly who needs our help. And you're right, to the point of they listen to a podcast, you have their undivided attention. And sometimes we have people get on the phone with our salespeople and they'll say to them consistently, oh, I've seen probably 20 of your videos, right? And videos meaning podcasts, right? Because we have them on YouTube and we have them on podcast platforms. So I've seen probably 5 or 6 or 8 or 9 or whatever. So once people get in there, if they're interested in that, then they continue to binge on it, right? And then all of a sudden it's like they know you. And then
they do.
It becomes easier to work with them because they're ready. They're sitting there ready to work with you because they know so much about you already. They're not going to get that from what you ate Saturday night or your nephew's graduation on social media, right? And those things are really nice. They get to know who you are as a person and the things that are important to you personally. Those things are really important in life, and I support social media 100% for that.
Of course.
But if you're looking for expertise and help in your business, then that's something entirely different.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. For me, I think back to the first time I made a buying decision through podcast. This is years ago. I don't even know what year it was, but me and Michael were the same age this year, I think, or something like that.
That's right.
Yeah. This was when Michael was, how old Michael is now, I was his age, or something like that. But I was listening because I wanted to do some SMS marketing, so text message marketing, which has become something that I don't think is as popular as it once was, but I wanted to learn it. So I went to the podcast app and started listening to finding anyone talking about it. And what do you know? There was one of the companies that I was thinking about buying from that had a podcast, but in addition, I think it was their CMO who was going on other podcasts talking about how to succeed in SMS marketing. Guess what? When I finally made my buying decision, that's the one I went with, not the other 2 competitors I was looking at, because guess what? They weren't around. But this CMO I was listening to, I'm like, man, I like the way this guy thinks. I like the way he does business. I want to work with him. Even if I may never talk to him, I want to know I'm using something that he would put his stamp of approval on. And that was how I made a buying decision. I know if you look at all the research, that is one of the primary, like podcasting is how people make decisions. And I think we're just going to see more and more of that.
Yeah, I think you're right. I really do.
Mm-hmm.
So, hey, all right, let me ask you this question, and then we got 2 more questions. All right, this one, what's one piece of advice that you would give everybody about their personal brand or personal branding?
Yeah, the first thing, and you all can speak to this so much more than I can. I'm just like resounding what I've heard you all say, but pick a niche, like actually pick something that you can really go all in on. And what I realized is I thought that, and I don't mean for this might come across wrong, I do not mean for it to, but I feel that many people go broad because they have this desire to help and serve a big group of people. And as nice and great as that is, it actually shows a little bit of fear on people's part. And people want to be like, how so, Alex? Well, here's the thing. If you pick a really narrow niche and you go all in on that and you actually display that that's what you stand for, that takes a lot of courage, because now what you do is on the line. If you say I help businesses, entrepreneurs, and marketing people, right? Like that's really broad. You're not really telling us what you do. But if you say, you know what? I only help single moms with kids that are young, still in the house, but they're an entrepreneur and they're trying to make it work. I'm teaching them to market better. If you tell me that's who you stand for, you put it all on the line. So if you fail or succeed in that, everyone knows that that's what you stood for. It takes a lot of courage to pick a niche like that. But I think that the people that are getting that narrow, that specific, is the internet, social media, thankfully, is bringing us all closer together. You can find those people really easily. Mm-hmm. It's showing them, hey, this is actually how I help. And 9 times out of 10, the people I see doing the best in business are the ones that they serve someone so specific that when you hear it, you're like, oh, wow, you really know what you do. And I think that if I can give one piece of advice, it's that pick a real niche, narrow it down to the point where, you know what, there's a few thousand people I could probably work with and I can do really well by them and serve them to the highest capacity.
It'll still be more business than you can take on.
Yes, it will. Right.
That's the truth. That's
It sure will. It sure will.
But I really like that. And people follow that courage. So that's a great way to put it. That's a really good way to put it.
Well, it kind of goes along with before BrandFace, I had a integrated marketing company, a small agency. And I was sitting at my desk one day.
Very expensive. I paid for it. Very.
He didn't pay me nearly what he should have paid.
Expensive.
If I had a chance to go back, I'd jack that price up so high.
I'd have paid it too.
So
I've heard the story. I know it.
So anyway, I'm sitting there and I realize, hey, I could work with anybody who walked through that door. This was after the big mortgage debacle when literally business just dropped for everybody and you had to rely on whatever skills you had to bring money through the door. There was a time like that, right? And so we were coming out of that and I realized I can do business with anybody that walks through that door. And the worst thing about it was I could do business with anybody that walked through that door. And that's when I realized I was no longer special. I was no longer something that was going to be sought after. So that's when BrandFace was born. And I realized, what's my passion? What do I do best? What do I want to do? in who can I really serve? And I thought to myself, okay, if I do this, if I only work with, at the time, business owners who want to be the face of their business in a big way, my guesstimate at the time was that I would lose about 70 to 80% of my business. And I did. I lost it. I lost 80% of it. 1 year later, I quadrupled my previous year because I narrowed it down to say, and there were many people that I had to say no to say, oh, I was working with you before. Well, I can still work with you. It's like, no, you don't want to be the face of your company. So I can't do that because I have to be true to what I'm building here.
Mm-hmm.
And that story goes right along with what you're saying. So
yeah,
I love it. Okay, last question for you. If our listeners have the freedom to visit anywhere in the world, where would you, Alex, suggest they visit and why?
Avoid Jacksonville, Florida at all costs, because I live here and too many people try to move here. So we'll get eaten by an alligator in a hurricane, all right? Those are the two out here. I'm just kidding. Where I live is beautiful. I'm thankful for it. But if I sit back and actually think about the places I've been, and I've not been everywhere. Let me start with that. But I actually found that Tuscany, Italy, like countryside, was just, one of the most beautiful places I've ever seen. Now, I'm a beach guy. So when I went there, I didn't have the highest expectations. I knew the food and pasta and pizza was apparently, and wine was like amazing, and that I can confirm that. But the scenery, I've just never seen anything like it in my life. And I'll tell you what, like me, I'm like a follower of Jesus. So I'm like, this is proof that Jesus is real. Like looking at how beautiful this is, like just mind blowing. So if you want like a relaxing place to go, that's where I suggest. Go out there and eat a ton of pasta and have some wine and just drive through the countryside. It's beautiful.
Great suggestion.
Yeah, great suggestion.
Great suggestion.
All right, Alex, how can people reach you if they want to get in touch with you?
Yeah, so I've sent everyone to the same place. And first off, let me mention this. If PodMatch sounded interesting to you, because we did talk about that quite a bit, Tonya and Michael will have a link in the show notes, in the description, all that. And it's a link that is theirs that will get you the best possible deal you ever can. So that is evergreen. I feel very comfortable sharing that. That will always be the best deal that you will ever get. If you're interested in more from me, you can go to podpros.com/win. podpros.com/win. And on that page, it'll give you 5 quick wins as a podcast guest or host, or someone who's wanting to be a podcast guest or host. You can consume it in less than 5 minutes. I don't want your email address or anything like that. So for 5 quick wins in less than 5 minutes, podpros.com/win. Tonya and Michael, though, thank you so much. I hope everyone hangs out with you. Your podcast is amazing. Your brand is amazing. And I just fully respect what you all do.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for being with us again.
Of course.
Brought to you by BrandFace, the only comprehensive personal brand building system across the globe.